Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our evening here and our discussion. Thank you very much for coming. If at any point in the evening you can't hear us, please do wave at the back. We will have wired microphones, but it is quite easy to stop speaking directly into them, so please do wave if you can't hear us. For those who don't know me, I'm Simon Crompton. I'm a British author on menswear and the founder of the website permanentstyle.com, which is the biggest site in the world for bespoke and sartorial menswear. And this evening, I'm joined by an absolutely stellar range of guests. I'm very honored to be here with everybody to talk about a subject which is very close to my heart, and I know to a lot of my readers as well, which we have grandly titled Dressing Up in a Dress-Down World. As the world, and particularly menswear, I think, seems to be becoming more and more casual. How, where, and maybe even why should we dress up? And I think we'll have a great discussion on that topic this evening. Before we kick off, I want to say just a big thank you to Anderson & Shepherd and to Bud Shirtmakers, our hosts for this evening, who are the reason this wonderful event could take place. I've known both Anderson & Shepherd and Bud for a long time, worked with them for a long time, wear them as I am this evening, and they have also provided all of the clothing we can see around the sides on the mannequins. Lots of interpretations and ideas there as well about maybe dressing down but still looking extremely elegant. And for those who don't know Anderson & Shepherd and Bud, they are both historic artisans in London, both of whom are still cutting all their clothes on site, which is a wonderful thing to go and see if you haven't done. And I know that they also have a really big following here in the US. One of the reasons we're here and doing this now is that both Anderson & Shepherd and Bud have their trunk shows at the moment, which have been going very well. So they are still here, if anyone is convinced by what they see this evening and wants to make an appointment. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers. Starting on my right, we have John Demsey, who is the Executive Group President of Estee Lauder, and more importantly for this evening, a very big menswear enthusiast and customer of Anderson & Shepherd and Bud. Next, we have Averyl Oates, who is the Managing Director of 10 Corso here in New York, and I think will bring a very interesting fashion perspective to what we're going to talk about this evening.
Thank you.
We have next Scott Schuman, better known as the photographer, the Sartorialist.
That's my superhero name.
How do you fit it under the suit? That's what I want to know when you want to rip it.
Big S under here. I'm Schuman. I've got a big S.
Jay Fielden, who's the editor-in-chief of Esquire, and Bruce Boyer, author on menswear and general authority. I think maybe, given we want to talk about men dressing down, let's try and see what the panel thinks of that first. Maybe kick off with you, Jay. Do you think that men are dressing down? Is that fair? Is that accurate?
Not in this room, from what I can see, which is great to see. I think everybody looks spectacular, including everybody on the stage, or whatever one would call this here. I mean, one certainly is seeing that play out in, I think, the men's shows, as we say, and on the street to a certain extent. But you know, and it doesn't frighten me. I don't know.
Why not? Why doesn't it frighten you?
Be frightened? Because I think there's always been some version of dressing down, right? Even if it meant instead of wearing a three-piece chalk-striped suit, wearing a three-piece herringbone suit or something in the country. You know, I think there's always interesting things that go on about the mixing of different requirements for the way that you dress, whether it's office or you know, out where I live in Connecticut. You know, I like the mix of things like that. I think it can be interesting and refreshing and creative. I don't like the part that obviously is slovenly.
Yeah, so where do you draw the line? What does scare you that you see that counts as slovenly?
That's a great question. Many minefields for me to walk here. Probably for all of us. But I would just say, let me try to put my finger on one. Who just broke up with Ariana Grande?
Pete Davidson.
You said the
I'm
name.
the voice
I didn't.
of the youth.
That might be, in the realm of that. I mean, even though I like things like Supreme and I like the Virgil Abloh collaborations, and I like Virgil at Vuitton and all that kind of thing, I think that there's a kind of just random ugliness to some of that stuff and a lack of it being thought through. But that doesn't mean that sometimes good ideas come from people going too far.
And Scott, what have you made, for example, if you look back to when you first started the Sartorialist website, for example, have you seen a real decline in the kind of things let's not call it a decline, a trend in what you've been shooting?
I don't think things have changed that much.
Okay.
The style has evolved, and the one thing that I've been doing a lot of studying. I'm doing a book soon about menswear, and I've been studying historically the evolution of menswear, and what's happening now is no different than what's been happening in history for the last 300 years. People talk about this sneaker evolution. Everyone's wearing these big sneakers and everything, and guys are becoming more sporty. But sports consistently are the things that always move men's fashion forward. 200 years ago when you were young, there was, guys were riding horses. That was a big thing that was moving it forward. Or golf or whatever, what's the name of the prince that was playing the golf all the time? Prince Edward, Duke of Windsor. He really was very fashionable, but like a lot of what he wore was very golf inspired. So, what's happening right now I don't think is any different than what's always happened in fashion history and men's history. It's just we're really living through that evolution right now. The trick is going to be, how do you find the balance? How do you take the best of new technology and evolve that into what we're wearing? I think my thesis for the night, I didn't have notes like Averyl and like you've brought. I wish I would have known you guys were bringing notes, but my thesis for the night is that I think we are on the verge of a new golden era of travel. That with today's fabrics and the stretch and things like that, we could look better traveling now than we ever have and be comfortable doing it. Don't laugh at me, but I did wear, on the flight back from Paris after the last women's shows, a pair of stretch jeans that I had from J. Crew. I've never worn jeans on an 8-hour flight. They're not comfortable. These were comfortable, and you can take that same kind of idea of stretch in cords or in suits or whatever, and that'll be one of the things I'll be interested to hear what you guys think is, I was talking to some very accomplished, very young new tailors that opened a company recently, and I was asking them, do you think you would have fabrics with stretch, do suits with a little bit of stretch? And they said, no way. And I said, why? Well, that's just not done. We just don't do that. That's just, that's not the best of what fabric can be. And I really don't agree with that. I think, why stand on that? Why make something like that a cutting off point? Why not try and make it the most comfortable? And whether you like it or not, that's what your next customer is going to be used to, is having something like that. So why
not be
make that an
open-minded
issue?
about it?
Why not be open and why not? I think it's like, as a photographer, where we're at with stretch and fabrics is kind of like where we were at 10 years ago with digital photography. The concept is there. Now they just have to refine it. So you can, I'm sure they're going to come out, with fabrics that are going to be as beautiful with a little bit of stretch. That make
and
it
just
a
do
little
that
bit
better
more,
when the demand is there.
Yeah, they just haven't gotten it. It's the beginning of that whole
I'd make an argument for uncomfortable clothes. I really would. I know what you're saying, but I think that there's something to, there's a story that I heard once from a close editor friend who knew Naipaul, and they both got in an elevator here in New York when he was visiting, and they were going up in the elevator, and he looked at my friend, whose name was Charles, and he said, "Charles, I so admire the way you wear your collar open at the neck." And my friend said, video, why would, it's not something you can't do. You could do that too, you know. And he said, oh, no, I could never do that. I have to feel the knot tight against my neck like a noose, right? And I get in an argument too with my wife sometimes about how she doesn't want to wear high heels, you know. And I say, okay, well, you don't have to wear them at home, but sometimes, you know, there's a reason to suffer. I mean, you know, I don't think that that's all clothes are for, but there are plenty of times when I get dressed and I think, like, this is not that comfortable, but I still really like these things, and they make me feel alive in the discomfort, you know?
I think it's about that open-mindedness, I think, that Scott was saying, in the kind of the same way, is that just realizing that it doesn't have to be just about comfort in the same way it doesn't have to be, you know, just about anything else. It depends what. Maybe
you're a comfort
just
creature.
picking up.
And Jay,
on-
you're a little kinky, so let's not forget that.
Averyl, sorry.
Just picking up on what Scott was saying about, you know, looking at fashion being cyclical and sort of going through, you know, the past 10 years. I was kind of looking at people like Lucas Ossendriver, who was the menswear designer for Lanvin, and that show in 2007 where he actually came out with white sneakers with suits. You know, we've come from that, and there's a Rick Owens before that, you know, who was very, very strong in footwear. And I think if you look at polarization, if you look also at the evolution of suits, and you go all the way to LeBron James, who dressed the Cleveland Cavaliers, and someone told me, yes, but they actually lost that game. But nonetheless, he dressed his group in Tom Brown for the playoff game. And that is a real cyclical pattern, if you see
showing
that.
how acceptable it is for men to dress up in that situation.
Absolutely.
For sports people like that to wear Tom Brown.
Absolutely. And if you also think that we are in a non-conformist world, and people are always going to rebel, they're always going to, what is the next step, and what is the evolution of that? And you did, Scott, mention very many things of interest there, but comfort. I think everything is in a world where we're traveling so much. You know, everything was leading to comfort. It may be stretch fabrics, it may be sneakers with a suit, it may be, but I think what we're doing is we're actually adapting our wardrobes. And millennials, we haven't spoken about that one subject, that of course are the leaders of the next thought, is, you know, what are they doing in the professional realm? You know, what are their careers actually dictating that they wear? But I think it's a myriad. Today, people are actually dressing, in my opinion, for comfort, for ease, for themselves, and to reflect their authority in many different ways.
Maybe that point about dressing for yourself is an interesting one. I mean, John, for example, do you I assume you're not a huge fan of stretch fabrics, but what do you find? Do you think you dress for yourself in that regard?
I've always dressed for myself, but I think what's happening in fashion or men's fashion is there's people want to be unique and want to be different, and that's why I think the future of sartorial bespoke clothing, and particularly in menswear, actually portends to be stronger in the future, because nobody wants to look like everybody else all the time, and you want to be yourself and you want to be unique. And when you travel around the world, and you know, I guess the last women's shows, they proclaimed the death of the tracksuit, and all of a sudden women are wearing dresses again. So it's only equivalent that a guy should wear a suit again. So I think that, you know, as you go through youth and as you start to get older, you start to understand your own personal style and wanting to look good in your skin and to look good for yourself and for the image you project to others. So the whole hyper-personalization trend actually accelerates.
You know, John, if you look at casual bespoke as well, look at this whole trend of casual bespoke that in some ways Xenia also started. So Xenia have got a made-to-measure casual bespoke line, and a zip pullover jumper can be $1,600. A pair of made-to-measure jeans.
Mine just arrived yesterday, so yes,
There
I know.
you go.
It's along with my
So-
Dapper Dan tracksuit. So
There
yes.
you go. So, and a pair of jeans is anywhere from $800 to $1,200. And apparently Xenia are so bowled over by the demand. And you question, what is that really about? Is it about actually the fact that people want that intimacy? They want the fit. So clearly price is not an issue. It's a little bit of, I think, actually, you know, buying into something that is bespoke, is made for them.
I mean, I guess, Bruce, you and I have seen a lot of this in terms of the growth of what we've been covering, you for a lot longer than I have, but in terms of the growth of interest in bespoke, a lot longer. A lot longer, is it? Okay. I mean, a lot of that is about personalization as much as anything else, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I expected you to say, and now, last but not least. I'm sitting over here in the corner. Well, I had actually, a while ago, I made up a joke about this. It's not much of a joke, but I'll tell it anyway. I said that I had went to a funeral viewing, and I and the corpse were the only ones wearing ties. But my point, actually, because it's not much of a joke, my point was serious, and I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction, because what fascinates me about this dress, not dress, and so forth, is the kind of, I don't want to get intellectual, but the sociology behind it. And I'm a big fan of a sociologist named Richard Sennett, who, quite a few years ago now, wrote a book called The Fall of Public Man. And his thesis was that up until very recently, each of us was actually two people. And this gets, Jay, to what you were saying with your wife about, what we were at home and what we were when we're out. Sennett's point was that we're all private people and public people, and that the way we act with our intimates, with our friends, family, and so forth, and the way we dress is one thing, and when we go out into the marketplace and the business world and we meet strangers, we dress and act and even speak much differently. And then Sennett's idea was that we've lost the public self. That if you listen to TV, for example, people are willing to talk about anything. There is no, the public has become the private and vice versa. But my interest in this, as it relates to clothing, is, and I wanted to raise this question, because I don't think you should be allowed to ask all the questions. I want to ask a question. Have we lost our sense of occasion? It used to be within memory.
Bruce, you can't ask the questions and answer them, you realize. You have to do one or the other one.
I can't count on you to answer them. I have to answer myself. It used to be that people dressed for occasions. I know in town here, 21 is one of my favorite restaurants, and I go there, and you're paying $35 for a hamburger, and so it's an occasion. But now you're sitting next to somebody who's wearing distressed jeans, and that takes away from the occasion for me, and I'm assuming, I haven't been to weddings or funerals for a while, but I'm assuming that people wear cargo shorts and all sorts of crazy things. But what do we feel as a society that constitutes an occasion is what interests me.
What do you think, Jay? Do you see that?
You mentioned cargo shorts, so I have to say something about that because there's an interesting thing. I mean, this is a little bit off your point, and I'm going to come to it. But I belong to a golf club out in Connecticut, and they have these very strict rules, right? And as all these clubs do, right? As I'm sure all you guys are familiar with, and ladies, and yet everyone who goes to the club looks terrible, right? It's fascinating. So I showed up one day wearing these cargo shorts that are like Brunello Cucinelli, like definitely not down not hanging off my hips and not below my knees. And the guy came out and basically gave me a traffic ticket for wearing them and told me I had to go change my shorts, right? But as I'm looking at everybody else at the club who's following the rules, you know, they're wearing like these gigantic shorts that 5 people could fit in, and these, you know, shirts where the sleeves come down past the elbows, which should be the crime, not the shorts, and wearing tennis shoes instead of golf shoes, right? And you mentioned golf and what an elegant sport it once looked like. So there is also a kind of weird thing of the rules sometimes of you know, keeping people from actually looking good. But of course, I guess it requires a certain amount of taste and style.
Yeah,
but
you know, bad taste isn't a crime, I think, is the, you know, problem
should be,
there.
Bruce. Come on.
I wasn't speaking. But I think this, you know, you have to ask yourself, what happens to a society when there aren't any occasions? You know, when we don't have a sense of occasion. What does that mean?
Scott, as the voice of youth, I turn
Thank
to you
you.
at this point. Is this a generational thing? Do you see, has the younger generation lost a sense of occasion or just treats it differently?
Well, you know, I think we're in a particular moment right now. You know, a very particular moment of equality and privilege, and people not necessarily wanting to feel like they're overly privileged. And I think that makes a lot of people want to kind of go to the middle, not stand out too much, and not show too much privilege. They're a little nervous to show too much privilege, whether that's good or bad.
So there's maybe a greater fear of being overdressed
Yeah.
than underdressed.
I think so. And, you know, but I think that's a moment that we're in. I think it's good that, you know, we're figuring out how to work through that. But it's actually one of the things I was thinking about while I was coming here, and it's a question I would like to ask the other members of the panel and all of you guys. But why do you dress up? I mean, this whole idea is, you know, the one thing I think that happens in a group like this with people who are very passionate, especially about menswear, we talked about it earlier, that for some of these guys, it's blood sport. You know, they are so overly passionate. And what, you know, I kind of go back and forth between fashion and classic tailoring and women's wear. And the one thing that happens with this particular group is it becomes very elitist. And it becomes very aloof, and you know, my lapel has more stitches than your lapel, and blah blah blah. And what happens a lot of times, I think, is it becomes very aloof. Where what I think is a smarter way of going about it is not tell people why you're so well dressed or why you think this is the way. It comes off a lot of times as this is the way men should look, and that you're wrong and I'm right. And nobody wants that now. That's really the bad point. I think a smarter way of going about it is to try and get guys to understand why we love this. Why, and you know, and that's why my question would be, why do you dress up, Bruce? Jay, why do you dress up? What do you get out of it? I think if guys like guys in this room could communicate that better, what it brings to them, the positive and the thing that anybody else can feel, I think guys outside of that, or guys that are kind of on the line, might say, "Oh, okay, like it's not so snobby, you know," and I understand why they like this.
Maybe I can just jump. First of all, why I dress is none of your business. But
Well, come on, that's why we're here. That's why we asked you here, buddy.
But well, I was going
I
to
didn't say which side do you
when
dress
you talk
on.
about
Talking about your underwear.
when you talk about privilege and so forth, it seems to me that the essence of fashion is, in a way, privilege. You know, I mean, even well, let's say we see one of the Kardashian gals wearing a pair of jeans that looks so distressed they barely stay on her body. But we're given to understand that they cost $1,800 and therefore she is superior. Now, what comes up in my mind, and it could come back to this idea of occasion, is what happens when society continues to become more interested in democratization, in other words, a leveling of society, then what happens to fashion? And I suspect that's a question that, as a society, we really haven't come to terms with yet.
I think it starts to look like Gucci.
Well, we could all dress up, but that's not what's happening. We're all dressing down to the lowest common
But I think
denominator.
to Scott's point, I think what's very interesting is that you're, and I'm going to answer the questions now because other people are asking them all the time. I think there's an assumption that dressing up is a more polite thing to do, or a gesture of respect. That isn't necessarily the case in that case. You know, if the company you know you're going to be in actually is at a certain level and you know that, and they care more about privilege, for example, going there and being dressed extremely smartly is actually just as rude as going in somewhere else and dressing down a lot, right? So it's just a question of working out what is going to be the more appropriate or the most polite or the best gesture to the company you're going to be in.
It's about societal codes as well. It depends where you are. So growing up in the Midwest and growing up in a prep environment, or coming to New York City, or going to London, or going to the quote-unquote country club, or going into the barrio in Los Angeles, there are societal codes and castes that have always existed. And the youth culture always wants to establish its own vocabulary and its own way of fitting in. And you know, we work also in societal uniforms as well. So if you're in Palo Alto and you walk in wearing a suit and everybody's wearing, you know, Reeboks and shorts, it doesn't fit. So, you know, there is a sort of socialization that takes place in the way that people dress and the tribes that you're part of.
Conformist versus the non-conformist. Yes. And I would actually contribute to this question from a woman's point of view, saying not about men's clothing, but I was on a panel a few weeks ago at Chanel, and we were talking about glamour. And the question was, has glamour gone from the world of dressing? And I think that's really a transgender question, and that's one we're talking about now, because that's the definition, really, of occasion. And then you look at, you know, who sets the trends? Is it the people? Is it the fashion houses? And, you know, we don't know where it's going, but, you know, I'm a firm believer that certainly from luxury houses, that there is a feeling that they need to protect the provenance of the houses. They need to protect the luxury. They need to protect the bespoke nature. And I think that always comes out in a product that is more occasion-led, that's more glamorous.
I think it's
at the
ironic,
end of the day.
though, that in this era that it's actually the women who are actually wearing the men's suits.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point.
But, you know, it's also, though, these glamour houses that are the leaders of bringing sneakers to the forefront. You know, I mean, Louis Vuitton is at the front of that, of this unglamorizing, you know, it's
a margin of business.
It's volume. It's absolutely
right.
volume.
You make your money selling low cost of goods, high priced items. So the licensing business and the fashion business is based on moving units to the more popular democratic peoples.
But I mean, these people who
at-
had glamour, don't you think it's much less glamorous now? I believe.
I think there's an
between
element.
us, I believe much less in Louis
I think
Vuitton
there's
now.
an element, and that is absolutely about shifting volume. But look at Kim Jones at Dior. He's a tailor. Look at McQueen and what he did in his past. I mean, he was a tailor. And I think there's a real appreciation. There's a real appreciation of the fineness, of the luxury, of detail. And that, for me, is some element of glamour and occasion as well.
Maybe that point about occasion, maybe try and take a specific example. So, like, say, Jay, you're invited to a party in Manhattan, but you don't know the host, you don't know what they would normally do, but it's a dinner party. What would you wear that feels almost like that mid-level, that shows respect, but would be inoffensive? Do you see what I mean? When you don't know what the social code is, you don't know the host, what they would normally wear or what other people would wear.
I would wear my jumpsuit with pumps. I think you always have to go with what you who you are. I mean, I don't always wear a suit. I wear a lot of sport coats. I think I would just want to go, to have some sense of who the person was. As John was saying, you being in this town, as you've been in London, the neighborhoods, you have a sense. If it's on the Upper East Side, you have a sense it's going to be more formal than if it's in Tribeca, right? I was going to say something very positive, though, about, and that is positive, but I was going to say something that I think is interesting and to get us out of the feeling that the future is changing forever, and we're in the midst of it. We've been through this before, as Bruce said, as Scott said. There was not so long ago Dress Down Friday, right? Remember that horrendous idea? Which vanished. These things ebb and flow, right? I have a 15-year-old son, and I take a lot of stock in what he's up to, and he likes the sport stuff and the casualization of fashion and the pieces that are extraordinarily expensive, even though they look like you would never imagine wearing them on any occasion except to like mow the lawn, right? But he also recently came to me because he had some dance at school in which he wanted to wear a suit. And he really went on about how he needed a suit. It was not the blue blazer and khakis or anything like that. He has a deep interest in that, and so do all those guys who are obsessed with the off-white shoes and that culture. I think they're going to be blenders of this stuff. I think they're going to find the occasion to wear the suit and know, as he was knowing, I'm going to dance, I want to wear a suit. And I'm going to this, I'm going to wear the tennis shoes and the joggers, right, which are very popular. I think I don't think this is going away, and I think the appreciation of something that is at the level that an Anderson and Shepard suit is, or a Bud shirt, these kinds of things, these are extraordinary things you work toward for most people for their life, to be able to get their hands on one of these things, and then you cherish it for a long time. And this is not a boy, by the way, that does what I do. Basically, anything he sees me do, he doesn't want to do. I mean, he's a typical kid,
and actually,
right?
The converse
Right.
of that, and anecdotally, what I'd say, working in a store and having worked in stores, is the number of fathers who'd come up to me and say, but what am I going to wear? I don't want to wear this selection because I don't want to look like my son. So that's actually really worth bearing in mind as a retailer, because actually fathers don't want to look like their sons, and conversely. Yeah. So I think that in some ways, again, to your point, I mean, it's very difficult as a retailer. You've got to have the sneakers, and yet you've actually got, so you're covering a very, very wide variety of audiences. But to your point, what do you wear to a dinner party? Just make sure you understand your audience. and if you don't know who they are, dress with confidence.
This is the state we've gotten ourselves into. We're grown men sitting around talking about what to wear when we go out. Captains of industry. And we don't know what to wear. It's so crazy. You're talking about, I don't want to look like my son and so forth. That's it to me is a very good point, because when I see an otherwise sane citizen, a banker, a hedge fund guy, whatever, trying to dress like his surfer son, what I see is insecurity. I say to myself, this guy's 50, 55 years old. He doesn't know himself. That's, I don't know, it's just kind of sad and depressing, and my suspicion is that his son doesn't even respect him for wearing the cutoffs and the flip-flops, and, you say, listen, you're not going to live forever anyway, but you should look the best you can for your age, at least. I find it very bothersome that when I see guys trying to be buddies to their sons to the extent that they want to dress like them. It used to be completely the other way around. We used to dress children like adults, which is kind of bizarre too when you think about it. But it's even more bizarre when you have a grown man who's a reputable member of society trying to dress like something else. It just, you can tell how upset I get by this, right?
You can.
You're furious. But you have to say, I'd like to make one point again, trying to be a little positive about this, as opposed to us sounding like grumpy old men, get off my lawn.
Why are you looking at me?
But let's maybe flip this a little bit, and let's try and look at it the positive way, right? Maybe in society right now, we're the rebels. If everybody's wearing cargos, if everybody's wearing jeans, and we're the one wearing suits, aren't we the ones that are the rebels? Aren't we the ones that are more daring? Aren't we the ones that are doing something a little bit special? Like this idea of going to a dinner party. I think we're in a part of society right now where, there are a lot of tribes, and people, you're a sneaker guy or you're a vintage guy or, I see it all the time. It's one of the things I shoot. It's what I do every day is, you really see people dressing less like a mainstream and everyone saying this is how men should look. Now, and like the point you just made, men don't know what to wear because there's so many options. And is that a good or bad? I think it's kind of great, We're saying, why is this guy looking like a 60-year-old surfer? Maybe that's who he is. Maybe he is a 60-year-old surfer. So I don't think we can, I think it comes off potentially a little judgmental, and I think that's the thing that a lot of the younger society is not interested in, is this kind of being so judgmental about the way other people are dressed. Stop worrying about the way other people are dressed and worry about the way you're presenting yourself and be happy and proud, like this is who I am. And it's really kind of, I think, a rebellious attitude,
What I love about the new media, what you do, and even what Esquire and everybody does, is it's super interesting to see what happens on the street and to see what happens in the mashup of people all over the world and the cues that people take. And I actually think people have been lamenting about the death of the old media and the death of the old retailing paradigm and the death of the artisanal, craftsmen and such. And actually, the new media shows the world of possibilities and shows the cues to everybody all over the world. So I actually think that watching your website and actually, or looking at your feed, I actually think it's super inspiring to see a Nigerian kid wearing a red blazer with a vintage pair of pants and a pair of sneakers and people mixing and matching things, because that's really what the world is about today. It's about the impossible mashup of the new ways of communicating in social and in traditional media. So I think it's incredibly empowering.
Even though that's not something you would wear, but you're still interested in it
Actually,
on a different level.
Some people in this room actually know I would wear a red blazer with sneakers, but that's a whole other story.
But I think judgmental and being influenced is a very, very fine line when it comes to social media, because you're both at the same time.
Well, I think I was going to ask about social media, and I think we kind of started talking about one trend about maybe people generally becoming more casual, but there's other trends obviously happening at the same time. One of them is a big growth generally in menswear in the last few years in terms of popularity, which kind of goes to the point, I think, about people just caring much more. Like you said, the guys who are much into their streetwear brands, but also really care about suits because they just care about clothes maybe a lot more than they used to. But is there also, not trying to be negative again, Scott, do make a positive point, but is the problem with the social media that because it's so fast the entire time, it's hard to maybe establish your own character and your own personality when there's something new so much more often? Or maybe this is something women's wear has had for a long time and just men we've been a bit more, sheltered from, haven't had to deal with.
Well, I think people confuse the fastness of things that are in the shop with what we actually wear. I could go back, my second book, my first book still sells, and that was shot 10 years ago. I could still flip through that book, and if we held images up, people would say, oh yeah, that still looks great. I think there's a confusion between the quickness of how fast product goes in and out of shops, but how we really dress. I don't think we really dress that differently. And the one thing I see, again, because I'm very Pollyanna and I'm a very positive guy, everybody knows that, is that the positive thing about social media is, for example, I was in South Africa and in Soweto, in one of the townships, and a guy said, "Oh, I've got to introduce you to this young kid," and it's this a young kid that lived in a cinder block house with an outhouse in it, but this kid would go and buy secondhand suits, take it to a local tailor, have it fit to him. And there's a picture of him in the book, and he's wearing a white hat with an Italian, with a red, white, and green band on the hat. And I said, "So what's the deal with the hat?" And he said, "Well, I know it's Luca Rubinacci's birthday today, so I'm wearing that." And you guys know who Luca Rubinacci is. And he said, "I'm wearing this in respect for him." And this is a kid who lives in South Africa, who lives a very simple life, but through social media, he found a dream that he wanted to aspire to. And it was so easy, you're not going to get GQ or Esquire there very easily, but they could very easily get on social media, to the point where, there's a famous wall at Pitti right outside the main building. Him and his friends would get dressed up, and they found a wall that looked like that wall, and they would go sit on that wall and take pictures of each other, dreaming of what that was like to be there. So again, there's a lot of negatives to social media, but there's also a lot of positives. There's a lot of things that separate us, but there's a lot of things that really pull us together. And again, we can, as opposed to being negative and judgmental, I think we can really accept. We keep talking about Gucci in this kind of negative kind of way, but what he does, I think, is incredible. I mean, it's this way that he mashes things up and mixes things up, and there's a real openness. And I think if you went to a dinner party now in most New York places, I think all people would ask is that you dress as you. If you're a suit guy and that's what your tribe is, feel comfortable and come that way. If you're a casual guy, come that way. Because now I think we're starting to dress more as tribes, and you associate kind of a certain thing, but I don't think people really expect you to dress like everybody else. And I think the thing that really has happened, I've seen over the years, is that as you get a little bit older, you start to figure out who you are. It's really just that strata of like 18 to 27 that they all want to look like everybody else. They want to look like all 18 to 27-year-olds everywhere in the world. But once you get past that, people start to really respect their nationality. Once you get past 25, 26, 27, Italians look like Italians, French look like French, Americans look like Americans, and people start to figure out, what is my mix in the world? And again, I think that comes from social media, because they're not looking at their neighbor. Their neighbor could be, halfway around the world.
Averyl, do you mind if I ask you, is this what it's been like in women's wear for quite a long time? Or we just been kind of sheltered in men's wear, that you haven't had some of the fashion or the social media, everyone's agonizing over all these new trends?
You've actually touched on this before, that the wonderful thing about menswear are the options now. Because when I used to buy menswear, for Harrods, Harvey Nichols, it was, forgive me for saying this, it was actually quite a boring buy. Because there was only so much you could do. There were so many options. And you couldn't, even in the tailoring department, you had a wonderful choice. I mean, I used to love choosing fabrics. That was beautiful. Because there was so much different between the weave, the texture, and how that was going to translate into a suit on the shop floor. But actually, the options were very limited. And then fashion kind of got out there, and you could do cropped, you could do flares, you could do Tom Brown, so the tight fitting, loose fitting, DBs, not just that, but just like so much more. And I mean, talking about social media, the one thing I would say is, so to answer your question, I think that actually to a certain extent, menswear is playing catch up, and that there are so many more options available today. And I think that's a great thing, and I think it's a way to express individuality. But just talking about social media, and I suppose not even social media, but the point about education is, if you look at, you look at suits and how they fitted before to how suits fit today, and I think there's a massive education that's come out of artisanal product, that's come out of brands actually educating the customer. And, you know, even look around here, much more fitted European type suits than, I would say, ill-fitting suits of 10 years ago. And I think that's down to brands actually talking about heritage and education. And I think that's really about magazines educating readership, social media to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think, you know, this is an interesting conversation about like social media versus, or in the context of magazines, and magazines have a lot of social media channels, but I don't know that you can learn as much as one should or can, or even in my lifetime, how I've really learned about the clothes has not really been just through pictures, right? You know, and pictures certainly educate the eye, and there's a certain amount that you can take in, but for the more sophisticated, you know, understanding of something and how it's made and where it comes from and why it is like it is, all the things we've referred to really, Bruce and John and everyone here, you know, is because we've read, right? And we've understood it from a social point of view, whether it's sociology or through the traditions of the culture, of the class, et cetera. And that, I think, is where you really start to kind of get a grip on why you choose certain things to wear and why you don't.
I think there's an emotional connection that people have in understanding the backstory of actually how something is made. So if you look at all the major luxury companies, or you look at companies like Anderson and Shepherd, and see that, knowing that there actually is someone who made those pants, and somebody actually made that jacket, and the fact that the pant cutter and the jacket cutter are two different pieces, and that person cut the pants for every major general and every major world leader, and to understand the provenance of walking in and seeing all the military uniforms and knowing where the leather came from or where the wool came from Australia. People love knowing more about what it is that they're involved with and experiencing and buying. And that's the piece that speaks so well for a higher form of dressing and art, is people like knowing the backstory.
Well, that's the glamour too. I think the story is the glamour.
Well, that's what menswear glamour is, right? Isn't it? It's that information,
I think so.
understanding.
I mean, I think knowing these things that vibrate in your solar plexus, right? You know, is what it's about. And
I think it's a privilege to know that, and people appreciate that privilege.
Actually, in the beauty business and the fragrance business, we actually saw in the last 5 or 6 years, when we stopped making products just for marketing and actually put the money into the actual product itself, the business got better. So when everybody was just trying to sell something with an advertising campaign or to market the hell out of something, everything got very commoditized. And there's a whole re-emergence or interest in terms of actually the craft, the ingredients, how something is made, what makes something special, what the experience of it is. So it's a complete turn.
That's the most positive thing I've heard all evening. That's amazing. I realize we are almost out of time. I certainly have more questions for the speakers, but do we have any questions from the audience? And I will run around and hand over a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you all for such a wonderful talk. For those of us who are perhaps not in the business and just out in the field trying to put clothes on every morning, in an increasingly informal world, how do you draw the line between dressing nicely, as we see in social media and everything, and costume?
Anyone?
It's like pornography. You know it when you see it.
So you mean that in a personal way, or you know, when you,
Yes,
you know?
So I work for the federal government.
Yeah.
Some of the attorneys that I work with wear sweatpants to work.
Yeah.
I usually wear a tie and a pocket square, and I attract a lot of looks. Some of the people at my agency, one guy came up to me once and said, "What do you think you are, Black Bart?" And there's an element of what we see as standard, just wearing a pocket square or a tie or cufflinks becomes costume out of the right milieu. And I'm wondering if you have any guidance for how we should not look like someone wearing a dinner jacket at a basketball game.
Well, I would say, as the great menswear designer, Coco Chanel, would say, spin around in front of the mirror, and the first thing you see when you look in the mirror, that first accessory, take it off. It's really, my girlfriend just went to a Drake's party the other night, and she said, wow, those guys really wear a lot of accessories. They got the pocket square, the this, the that, the pin, and the thing, and the... I think when it gets too much, you know it. And I've been watching all these Cary Grant films, North by Northwest. So simple the way he's dressed. And the one thing I would say more than anything else, I love, Anderson Shepherd, and I love all these kind of bespoke suits and things. But, the one thing I think a lot of us, or the one thing I've tried to do, at least with my site, is get people to understand fit is the most important thing. It doesn't matter how much the suit costs. If you're lucky enough to be able to have it made for you, that's great. You're really, in that kind of very privileged thing. People really dream for that. But if you don't want it to be costumey, it can be very simple. And the best way to do it is to have it fit good. Have the sleeve the right length, have the pants the right length, have the jacket. And, you might not be able to have it made for you, but if you can physically look good, and that's the one thing I think is the best argument against this kind of casual and dress down and tracksuits. I don't think a lot of that looks good physically. I mean, a suit can really hide a lot of issues. It can enhance a lot of the better parts of what you have, or what a man has. So again, I think it's a very positive thing. You can wear a suit in a way and physically look better than wearing a tracksuit, which is not really a great silhouette.
I'm sorry, I'm actually going to contribute to that by saying I do love a dapper gentleman, I have to say, just in general. But you know what? If you've got a style and you've got attitude, I say do it. I'm all for an eclectic, world out there. And I would say just believe in yourself.
Actually, Tony Duquette said there's always room for another layer. So...
Another question?
Sorry, Averyl mentioned that some of the bigger brands are doing a good job at helping people combine things and, for instance, things that are more street influenced and styling. What can the smaller artisanal companies that you work with, Simon, so well, what can we do that would help in this, to convince people that actually these are good things to buy and how to wear them in perhaps a more contemporary way? Because as one of the Savile Row group, people automatically say, oh, I don't need a suit. Whenever you say I'm from this company or that company, the first thing people will say to me is, I don't wear suits anymore. The fact that we can make pretty much anything out of any material doesn't even come to mind. So what kind of things can we do to help?
I think one of the biggest changes I've seen with a lot of the bespoke artisans is they've become much better in recent years about showing, as you and Bud are doing this evening, showing that kind of customer exactly what the suit could be and how the accessories or anything else could work. Because I think historically, when clothing was a lot more uniform, it was fine to walk in and just have a suit, have a three-piece suit, have the flannel. You knew exactly what you wanted. When there's so many more options as there are today, someone actually has to see that and go, actually, pink corduroy in a jacket and a pair of jeans could look amazing. But you wouldn't think that. I would never see that in a swatch. And I think that the artisans that I see that are doing that really well are always kind of going to be a step ahead, because the suit that customer has in his head is a sort of navy two-piece that his dad wore to the office, or it feels very formal and very businesslike to him. But showing people all the different things they can do, I think, is very important.
The flexibility and the versatility.
Can I add one thing? I think you have to think about the customer, especially a new customer that would be visiting somewhere like Savile Row, is that their experience is to go to shops and see a lot of mannequins and see a lot of looks put together. When you go into a lot of Savile Row things aren't, it's bolts of cloth. They don't know how to relate to it. They don't know how to communicate. It's not a shop. It's very, and you have to imagine it's very intimidating for someone to go in and figure out how to communicate, and this shopping experience is so different. I think the shops that do the best job is, there are tailors throughout the world, who maybe show looks put together. This is what our point of view is. And even though most tailoring shops will say, we make it for you, they still have a point of view. The best ones still have a point of view. So I think to come up with some way to visualize what your unique point of view is, I think it makes it much less intimidating for a customer because they kind of know what they're getting and they can visualize. I mean, very few guys can walk into a shop and visualize what they're going to look like when all they're seeing are those thin bolts of cloth. So I think it's kind of imagining what that same customer who's going to, you know, I mean, imagine a 30-year-old customer who spent his whole life going to Harrods or J. Crew or something like that. Now they want to step up, but it's just such a huge step. It's, I think, really tricky if they can figure out how
that's a very good
to bridge
point.
that.
I mean, it's why the shop around the corner plays so well, right, with what you do, where you can actually see it kind of full context, the tie and the shirt and the sweater and the coat and the, you know, all of it. I think it's hard sometimes unless you're, you know, somebody who's like a lot of the guys in this room, it seems like, you know, they would be able to go in there and say, like, I really want this kind of jacket and this kind of cloth and it cut like this, but there's not a lot of guys that do. They need to be inspired to see something like, I want that, you know, and I understand that the shop is, what's unique about it is it's not like all other shops, right? You know, so it has a kind of austerity to it and a simplicity, but the question is, how do you show those things that you can immediately say, like, oh, I didn't think of that. I need that, though. I want that.
I mean, I think it's very striking that even those guys who have confidence going into tailor shop, they spend hours and hours poring over images. You know, they've been looking at archive images, they've been looking at things online, they've been looking at the Sartorialist, and they've been looking at things to inspire them because because they want them to make that connection, and they would often even walk into the tailor with an image in their hand they printed out or something because they're trying to make that leap themselves.
Or you would have had the authority of the past to be, a guy would have walked in and said, I need a jacket to do X in, and you would have said, okay, well, these are the 5 jackets we do, and you're done, right? So, I mean, I think of somebody like Ralph Lauren. I mean, you know, you can't walk into that shop and not see 100 different ideas of what you might need or look like, and yet it feels very English, right? It's very inspired by the Savile world, but it brings it to the world of lifestyle and context, and that's tough, but it goes a long way in men's imaginations.
I don't think it's any different with women, actually. I think there's such an oversaturation today of everything. And I've always worked with big department stores, and I think that a customer comes in now, you know, I've got a small store, a customer comes in and I'm feeling that what they're actually saying is, thank goodness there's an edit. You know, because I don't know what to buy. And thank you for dictating what that is to a certain extent. And I think your challenge is actually how to take something that's, you know, a swatch of fabric and vocalize that in a different way. But I think you've got such intimacy there, and you've got the ability to be able to do that it's I think I see it as a real strength.
I might add one last thing if I can. It's also key, what guy, right? That's what we always think of at Esquire, right? Is who's the guy this is for? And again, to understand some of these shops before you walk into them is one thing, but if you don't know what that is, are you in the realm of kind of, is this just for an Englishman or is this for an American? Is this for, you know, so how do I see, there needs to be examples of the kind of guy that represents that world. It doesn't have to be models, you know, but it needs to be kind of somebody you can relate to, respect, want to be, maybe feel comfortable looking like. That I think, you know, as we do in the magazine, we try to really think very hard about who is the guy, right? I mean, that's always the most annoying question, right? And the hardest to answer.
Thank you very much. I want to say that when I came into the room, I was a little shocked because I was lost. I see men, to me, look pretty much the same. So 21st century for me is not about dressing up and down, but it's about in and out. What is your inner vision, and how do you exhibit what you represent? How you are as a unique individual. And in today's world where military, sport, traveling, everything becomes one. the most exciting thing for me is how do you take a suit to the next level? How do you modernize the suit to fit the new man? The man who can walk in the Cairo restaurant, in Cairo, in Moscow, in New York, in London, and feel comfortable, because the suit will represent Asia, Africa, Western culture, Eastern culture, all the cultures that find togetherness in the new ideas. And that's, for me, is exciting part about fashion. And I'd like you to touch upon this. How is globalization, you feel, will change the suit? And where are we moving on from point of conformity?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing that occurred to me is that when you look around and you look at the men, they all look the same to you. They don't to me. They look completely different to me. And I was talking about this with somebody earlier, and my feeling has been, and I don't mean this in any sexist way, so don't jump all over me, but men's clothing is much more subtle than women's. Women's skirts go from here to there in a season. If a man's lapel shrinks or increases by 1/4 of an inch, it's a revolution.
You're talking about white privileged men.
I'm talking about a basic conservative
That's not
guy.
basic.
But I mean, I see a lot of difference that you don't see. That's one answer. The second answer is that you talk about globalization. I'm very interested in what's happening in Asia, because in many ways, I think that Asia is going to be very shortly the fashion capital of everything. Even in menswear, I noticed that the Chinese, Japanese, whatever, they look at what the Italians are doing, what the Brits are doing, what the Americans are doing. They take a little here, a little there, mix it up, come up with something much different, which doesn't mean that they're not interested in the tradition of clothing. I was recently talking with a fellow named George Wang, who's got a wonderful men's store called Brio in Beijing. And I said to him, how do you sell clothes in Beijing? And he said, well, my customer's very interested in the heritage of things. You know, he wants something contemporary, but he wants it to have a heritage. Something, I don't know, I guess you would say something authentic about the clothing. You know, that we're not all, to come back to what you were saying, that we're not wearing costume, that there is something authentic about
And I think one of the
what we
things,
wear.
just to follow up on that, Bruce, I think one of the things that's surely been most striking in the last 10 years, it's a short time that I've been covering this area of menswear, is that actually it's become so international, and you can make a good argument that actually right now, by far the most interesting place for classical menswear is artisans in Tokyo. But these are young Japanese kids who are making the most beautiful shoes and the most beautiful menswear in the entire world, and they have none of that background. They've only worn suits since the 50s. I mean, they don't have any heritage at all in that kind of thing, but they're bringing in completely new look to it. But they are just they're actually more obsessive about this lapel width than you are.
And that is an international look. It would have been perfectly true that, let's say 50 years ago, if you were standing at the corner of Fifth Avenue and 57th Street and looking at men passing by, if you knew about men's clothing, you could pick out where the man was from. You could say, oh, that guy's German, that guy's French, that guy's British, that guy's an American, that guy's an Italian. Today, you can't.
I think you can still pick.
You can?
No, I think you can still pick out an Italian. I mean, someone that's really into menswear. I think you can still pick an Italian over French, over
You have a much
English.
finer eye than I do.
Oh,
And
come
I
on.
can't anymore.
You're Bruce Boyer.
It's my burden. Anyway, seriously, I can't anymore. I think there is what I think of as that we've come into a second international look. The first international look was in the 1930s, when every man, no matter where he was, copied either Savile Row or some Italian tailor. It could be from Rio or from Shanghai, whatever. That was the first international period. But I think we're in a second now, and I have difficulty. But I bow to your finer. Well, you do have a finer eye. You're a photographer, for God's sake.
I think we might have time for one more question, although we've definitely run over at this point. Do we have one final question from anybody? Yes, we have one here. Would you mind, or someone mind just passing the microphone across? Thank you very much.
To bring the conversation around to why we're all here tonight, the lady on the panel mentioned that she thinks menswear fits better now than it ever did. I tend to disagree strongly. I think menswear, the fit of menswear now is all over the map. No matter which line you go to, you don't know what size to put on. And in fact, I'm getting all my clothes made now because I really didn't want clothes with a 5-inch or 4-inch zipper on the pants, with jackets that stop above my bottom. I just wonder how many men walking down the streets in short jackets would wear them if they could see themselves from the back.
I'm just going to...
Especially when they're tight. But
I'm not going to...
But what I think is interesting about what Simon does, and how he looks tonight in particular, that what he's wearing, any man could wear in any time, at any age. And that's what menswear used to be. Menswear isn't that now. Menswear is something different.
I think
Men
to
can
be
wear
fair,
whatever they want, however they want.
I think
And it's
menswear
okay.
hasn't been that for a very long time. I think if anyway we're quite privileged now that there's much more interest in that kind of dressing than there ever has been really for decades, right? And I'm no fashionista, I know very little about fashion, but surely for 30, 40 years it hasn't had that kind of a focus on it.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I think, I understand what you're saying in the sense that, there was a code, for years of how a gentleman should look. But you know what? I think there were a lot of guys that weren't that happy with what that code was. They didn't want to look like everybody else, and they, I think that's why a lot of people are kind of turned off by this segment of menswear, because they find it very judgmental. I think it's very tricky to say that guy doesn't look right because his jacket's too short. Maybe that's the way the guy wants it. Maybe the trend hasn't come along the way that guy wants to dress. I think, we have to, as opposed to, it's one of the things I try and do with the blog, as opposed to looking at what other people are doing wrong, try and figure out what you're seeing of guys that are doing something right. And I'm always trying to find inspiration in the guys that I find doing something right. And I don't worry about the guys doing something wrong, or I try and figure out, most of the guys that I shoot, I would never wear what they're wearing, but the way I look at it is, what can I learn from him? What can I learn? There's something about what he's doing that looks good. I wouldn't wear it, but maybe it's the color. Maybe it's the color combination.
It's
maybe it's
not
the
about
pattern
right or
mixing.
wrong.
But it comes off that way
It's
when...
about what's suitable for the type of body. That was my point.
Well, but I think...
And many
but that's
guys
an idea
look
of...
great with their bottoms hanging out.
But that's an idea
But
of what's
many
right
don't.
or wrong.
And that
a
was
lot
my
of guys,
point.
maybe they like their booty hanging out. Maybe they got a great booty.
I think there's to try and carry on your point of being very positive about this. I think being judgmental is never going to be a good thing in any of these realms, isn't it? But the point about communicating it well, which I think a lot of us, including you, do well, is just by showing it, you know, and it goes to the point about education that we've talked about and people wanting to know about those kind of things. It goes to the point we talked about kind of subtle style where it just has to be something which looks good and you can't quite point at that one accessory you kind of want to take off. There's very similar themes across all of it, and generally about politeness and about, you know, caring about how you look in front of others. Really is kind of universal across all of it. Doesn't matter what you're wearing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be defensive, but the only reason why I said what I said is I think is because of the availability. I think there is so much out there that you can actually go and choose. And I think, and I was in my mind when you were speaking, I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to exclude mass market and high street, but actually, do you know what? I'm not. Because my nephew, when he was looking for his first suit, he actually went to Marks and Spencer's or wherever it was, and he actually bought a washable, well-made suit for his first whatever it is that he needed a suit for. And that's all it was he needed. And actually, you know, the fact that he could go and do that with pocket money or whatever it was is pretty more advanced. It's definitely far, far more advanced than it's ever been. So I think you have options. That was kind of a little bit, and then therein lies, you know, your perception of that beauty after that.
I think we'll definitely have to leave it there, unfortunately. It's been an absolutely amazing discussion. Thank you very much to all the speakers.
Best dressed room of human beings on the planet right now. I was hoping I could take a 360 picture of absolutely everyone.
Please go ahead while I continue my thanks. Thank you very much to the General Society for having us this evening. Thank you very much to Anderson Shepherd and Bud, our hosts. Thank you so much. This couldn't have happened without you. Thank you to everyone here for coming. Please stay around for a drink and a chat about all these subjects if you'd like to. And we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.